Hey guys, I'm going to talk to you about peer review today because I think that a lot of us English teachers or any teacher that asks for student writing and also encourages peer review, we have likely been doing peer review for a while. You know, when we were students, we did peer review, and if we're publishing, then we're doing peer review. And a lot of the work that we'll do on committees and things like that is peer review related or requires an element of peer review, even if at an informal level. Because of that, we already, I think, truly understand the merits of peer review and the reasons that peer review is important, but from a student's perspective, I think sometimes we forget about that. So the purpose of this video is to talk about peer review, why we do it, to give you some helpful tips for being a peer reviewer, and then also to talk about what do you do with the comments and the feedback that you get from your peer reviewer. The reason that many students don't find peer review effective, or, I get students all the time say, I hate peer review, it's such a waste of my time. I get it. I have felt that way as a student as well, and I totally understand. And part of it comes from having unrealistic expectations from your peer reviewer, but then not really knowing how to give an effective peer review yourself. And that's what we're talking about here. Why should we do peer review? Because two heads are better than one. That's really what it comes down to. So if you imagine the ABCs and you write them all down on a piece of paper, and I give you 60 seconds to come up with as many words as you can, each beginning with a different letter of the alphabet, and all relating to any subject, say ancient Greece, you might be likely to come up with, if you're really unfamiliar with ancient Greece, maybe 5 words. A little bit of familiarity, maybe you've just gone through a history class and they talked about it, maybe 10, 12 words. You sitting in a history class yesterday on ancient Greece, so a lot of familiarity with it. You might come up with 18 words. But it's unlikely that everyone will be able to identify a word that starts with A, B, C, all the way down to Z in ancient Greece in 60 seconds. Okay, so time constraints do matter here. But let's say we had a classroom and everybody had 60 seconds and everybody is focusing on different letters, then as a class, we're much more likely to come up with the full 26-letter alphabet in 60 seconds. We can combine and compile all of that information. And that's really what peer review is for, because you might be a good writer and you might be good at structure. Someone else might be a good analyzer and they might be good at really digging into the content of their writing. But maybe they're not as good at structure, and maybe you're not as good at analysis. But if you can review the other person's paper for structure and they can review your paper for analysis, then they have the piece of the puzzle that you're missing, and that just means that your paper ends up being better. So that's kind of the goal of peer review, and peer review can function in a number of ways, but I think that many students think of peer review as part of the editing process. And while it's part, I think it's more part of the revision process. And the difference there being we're talking about big ideas as opposed to little ideas, little grammatical corrections. So I think a lot of students, when they think of peer review, they think, oh my gosh, I have to tell my classmate where they put the commas wrong, what sentences are fragments, and at a basic level, maybe, but for the purposes of most of your writing in college, as a peer reviewer, you're really just functioning as a member of the audience who is giving a reader response. So you're saying, hey, I'm reading your paper. Here are my ideas as I go through. Every thought that you have, you can write that down. If you're starting to realize, oh, this person has a lot of fragment sentences, then you can write that down. But you don't need to correct them. And also, your goal is to point out strengths and weaknesses, really. So as a reader, you're saying, you know what, this part was really clear and sound because you worked through it logically, kind of step by step. However, when I read this paragraph, I was a little bit confused. So if you're going to focus on anything, focus on this paragraph in your revision and editing stages. You as a peer reviewer are helping the writer identify weaknesses, but also encouraging strengths that they already have. So you're not just trying to say, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, but, well, this is really good, but work on this over here. As a peer reviewer, I don't expect, and thus you should not expect from your classmates, that they will edit your paper because it's different. I don't think that everyone knows exactly where to put all of the commas all of the time, and I'm not even sure I do. So I want you to keep that in mind. Really, it's just about getting a second set of eyes, reading through your ideas, thinking about structure. If you only focus on two things as a peer reviewer, focus on, does it make sense, and if not, where? And is it logically organized structurally? Does it flow effectively? And if not, where is the flow disrupted? Okay, so that's your goal as a peer reviewer. When you're providing peer review, I just want you to remember these things because you're going to give your reader, or you're going to give the writer, much better feedback if you're not trying to identify every mistake. So you don't have to make decisions for the author. If the author has a fragment sentence, you don't have to rewrite their sentence. You should just identify this is a fragment sentence. Or even if you notice the author has a lot of missing commas, you don't have to decide to insert those commas for the author. Just let them know. Hey, I noticed a lot of places where you needed to have commas, so maybe go back through and do a grammar edit, or go to the Writing Center and ask for help with commas or something like that. Ask your instructor, whatever. So you're making suggestions, but you can also ask questions, and I think that sometimes people don't enjoy peer review because they don't know how to handle constructive criticism. Like, how do I tell my classmate that I don't think they even have a thesis statement in their essay? So you can ask a question. What is your thesis? I wasn't sure about that. And then that can alert your classmate or the author to reassess their own thesis statement. If you felt like the conclusion was kind of boring, you could ask a question. Is there something you could incorporate to make this more exciting? Question mark. I think that comes across better than, hey, this was boring. I didn't enjoy reading this. And that's okay to feel that way. We don't have to like everything that we read, but how can we provide just a reader response? And that is what you are. You are a reader. And I just want you to respond with your thoughts as you read through the paper. Not necessarily your reflections on the topic, but your reflections on the writing. You can try the compliment sandwich if there's a piece of feedback that you find is going to be kind of negative, constructive criticism, effective feedback, but not a positive statement, then the compliment sandwich looks like this. I thought you had an excellent opening sentence. So you give them a compliment first. But I felt like the thesis statement was lacking in detail. So maybe you can add to that. Overall, you're on the right track, something like that. I personally use the compliment sandwich as much as I can because I don't like to make people's feelings hurt. So compliment, constructive criticism, compliment. And I think, you can try this in lots of places in your lives and maybe it will help. I don't know. But also pointing to specifics. The worst bit of feedback is, I like this. I like your writing. Your writing is good. Okay, thanks. That is not feedback. That is positivity, which is always fine, but why? Why do you like it? Why is the writing good? Point to some specifics. What are the strengths? Alternatively, this was boring. I hope you wouldn't say that outright, but what was boring about it? Well, what was wrong? You don't, instead of saying something like, The sentences were confusing. Well, which sentence? Could you give me an example of a confusing sentence and explore why that might have been confusing? Was it the wording? Was it the sentence structure? Was it the logic? What about it? Talk about some specifics. Also, when you're giving feedback, seek support. So it's perfectly fine to work through a peer review and send me an email and say, hey, I think I want to give this student a comment about their thesis here. What do you think about that? And that just erases some of the concern for, what if I tell my classmate the wrong thing? I really don't want you guys to ever worry about that. One, you can always ask me a question, but two, it's okay to tell your classmate the wrong thing because these are our opinions as readers. Once you get your feedback, I also think that students struggle so much with peer review because they don't know what to do with that feedback or they don't know how to take it. And sometimes it's just a matter of learning to take constructive criticism. But here's my 3 suggestions. So first of all, avoid a defensive stance. I think that there is a tendency, and I do it too, a tendency for, if you trust your reader to be engaging with your work and to take it slow and read through it, and they return with a comment that says something like, this whole paragraph confused me, I didn't really understand what was going on here, then there is a tendency to explain, well, here's what I meant when I said la 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 la, right? But you don't really want to explain to your reviewer. You want to rephrase so that you can better explain for any reader. So avoid taking a defensive stance. It's a hard thing to do, but you should understand that if you're being required to do a peer review, whether that's because you're in a class or you're publishing something for submission, it's part of the process, and your reviewer is providing you with these comments just to help you make your paper better. Consider the potential merits of each comment. So there are going to be comments that you don't agree with, right? That you're not sure about. Don't immediately reject them. Just consider them. Okay, what is the reader feeling when they read this? Or what are they saying or thinking? If the comment seems thoughtful, at least consider its potential merit. But of course, if you get to that point, or even right away, reject feedback. If you don't agree with it, you're not being defensive. You've considered the merit, and you're like, okay, thank you for the suggestion, but I'm not going to do that. That is totally fine. So again, your peer reviewer isn't your editor. If your peer reviewer is putting commas in all sorts of places and you're not sure that it's right, then just ignore that. So you should realize, this is, I think, the most important thing, and just especially in terms of the defensive stance thing. Realize that your peer reviewer is working through the essay as a reader and is likely to read it in much the same way that your evaluator will. So if your classmate gets to a paragraph and they think it's confusing, I might do the same. I might get to that paragraph and think it's confusing. So you should just, again, consider the merit of that comment and make changes if necessary. And if you're like, maybe you're just confused and my writing is clear, then that's fine. And you can always get like a second opinion, Let me know if you have questions. I know not everyone loves peer review. There's so many different types of peer reviewers. There's people that don't take it seriously, possibly the worst kind. There's people that edit every sentence, every grammar error. That is helpful as long as they're correct. And then I think there's a middle ground where people are just focusing on content and focusing on structure, and helping you make sure the big stuff is as good as it can be, because that's what matters the most. So those are the peer reviewers I'd like you guys to be in this week. If you have questions, let me know.